I used to think birthdays were the one day you were allowed to take up space, not demand attention, just exist without apologizing. So when I walked into my parents' dining room on my birthday, I wasn't hoping for anything expensive. I didn't expect surprises or speeches or gifts wrapped with bows. I just wanted to hear someone say, "Happy birthday, Hannah," and actually mean it. Instead, my mother was fastening a diamond ring onto my sister's finger. My father was smiling like he'd just done something noble. And the cake, sitting in the middle of the table, already had a name written across it in pink frosting. Her name, not mine. They told me not to be dramatic. They told me life wasn't about material things. They told me I should be grateful. I laughed along so I wouldn't cry. That night, I packed a hoodie, $60, and the last bit of dignity I had left, and I disappeared. My name is Hannah Miller, and for most of my life, I was known as the easy one. That's what my parents called me when they talked to relatives. That's Hannah. She's independent. She doesn't need much. She's mature for her age. What they never said out loud was what that really meant. I was the child who learned not to ask. From the outside, our family looked ideal. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where lawns were trimmed every Saturday and porch lights turned on at the same time every evening. Inside our house, the walls were covered with framed photos. Birthdays, holidays, school events. If you looked closely, though, you'd notice something strange. Most of the pictures were of my younger sister, Emily. Emily was born after years of worry and whispered conversations behind closed doors. My parents called her their miracle, their second chance, their reminder that good things could still happen. I was already there when she arrived, standing at the foot of my mother's hospital bed. But from that moment on, it felt like the spotlight shifted and never came back. When Emily spoke, my parents leaned in. When I spoke, they nodded distractedly. If Emily was tired, plans changed. If Emily was upset, voices softened. If Emily failed, excuses appeared. When I struggled, I was told I was strong enough to handle it. Hannah, you're the older one. Hannah, set a good example. Hannah, don't overreact. I learned very quickly that being good meant being quiet. It meant finishing my homework without reminders, making my own meals when my parents were busy, and smiling whenever someone praised Emily in front of me. I learned how to clap politely for her achievements while tucking my own into invisible corners. There was no single moment where I thought, they don't love me. It was subtler than that, slower, like erosion. Love, I realized, wasn't absent, it was just uneven. By the time I grew older, I didn't expect fairness anymore. I didn't expect to be chosen. I just hoped carefully, foolishly, that one day, maybe on my birthday, they would look at me and see more than the child who never caused problems. That hope would cost me more than I ever imagined. My birthday landed on a Saturday that year, which felt like a small gift in itself. No school, no work, no excuses for anyone to be too busy to notice me. I woke up later than usual, lying in bed for a few extra minutes and staring at the ceiling, telling myself not to expect anything. I'd learned that lesson early. Expectations were dangerous in my family. They set you up for disappointment, and disappointment, according to my parents, was always a personal failure. Still, I couldn't help the quiet hope curling in my chest. Maybe a card, maybe a simple happy birthday, maybe just being invited into the room instead of hovering at the edges. When I walked downstairs, I smelled coffee and sugar. The dining room lights were on, brighter than usual. For half a second, my heart lifted. Then I saw the box. It was small and elegant, resting in the center of the table like it belonged there. Black velvet, the kind of box you didn't need to open to know what was inside. My sister Emily was standing beside it, practically bouncing on her toes, her hair already styled, her smile barely contained. "Oh, you're up," my mom said, glancing at me briefly before turning back to Emily. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. "Go on," my dad said warmly. "Open it, sweetheart." No one said my name. No one said happy birthday. Emily lifted the lid and gasped, one hand flying to her mouth in a way that felt rehearsed. Inside was a diamond ring, clear, flawless, catching the light from the chandelier and scattering it across the walls. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Mom, Dad, are you serious?" My dad laughed, the deep, proud kind of laugh I'd heard 1,000 times, just never directed at me. "You deserve it. You've had such a stressful year." Emily slipped a ring onto her finger, holding out her hand to admire it. My mom clapped softly, eyes shining. It just felt right, something meaningful. I stood there, frozen, waiting for the moment when someone would realize the mistake. Instead, my mom finally turned to me with a gentle frown. "Hannah, don't make that face. It's not always about gifts." Not always about gifts. As if I'd said anything, as if wanting to be acknowledged on my own birthday made me shallow. My dad cleared his throat. "You're an adult now. Birthdays change. What matters is character, not presents." And just like that, my birthday gift arrived. A lecture. They talked about responsibility, about gratitude, about how much they'd done for me growing up. Emily sat quietly, twirling the ring on her finger, not meeting my eyes. Then I noticed the cake. Pink frosting, decorative flowers, carefully written letters. "Happy birthday, Emily." "I didn't want to waste another cake," my mom said quickly when she saw me staring. "You understand, right? We already celebrated earlier." "Earlier without me?" Something tight and sharp pressed against my chest. I felt it rising, heat behind my eyes, a crack in my throat. Crying in that room would have made everything worse. It always did. So I laughed. I laughed like it was funny, like it didn't hurt, like I hadn't just been erased from my own day. And in that moment, standing between my parents and my sister's diamond ring, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't an accident. This was exactly how they saw me. That night, the house felt louder than usual, even though no one was speaking to me. I lay on my bed with the lights off, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling I'd memorized years ago. From downstairs, I could hear the low hum of the dishwasher and my parents' voices drifting in and out of conversation, comfortable, relaxed, like nothing important had happened that day, like I hadn't. I kept replaying the scene in my head, the ring, the cake, the way my mother had said, "You understand, right?" As if understanding was my responsibility alone. It wasn't about jealousy, I knew that. I wasn't angry that Emily had something nice. What hurt was the realization that they hadn't even tried to hide it anymore. There was no apology, no awkward pause, no moment of recognition, just certainty. I didn't matter enough to be included. I sat up slowly and looked around my room. The furniture was old, mismatched hand-me-downs, things no one wanted anymore. My childhood trophies were boxed away in the closet. The walls were bare, except for a small corkboard where I'd pinned notes to myself over the years. Reminders, deadlines, little promises I'd made when I needed motivation. Just get through today. Don't cause trouble. You'll leave someday. I opened my closet and pulled out my backpack. My hands were shaking, but my mind felt strangely clear. I packed a hoodie, my phone charger, a water bottle. From the back of my drawer, I took out the envelope with $60. I'd been saving money meant for emergencies, though I'd never imagined the emergency would be my own life. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the small stack of bills, then folded them carefully and slid them into my bag. I moved quietly, instinctively. Years of trying not to be noticed had trained me well. At midnight, the house was completely still. I stood at the back door with my hand on the knob, listening, half expecting someone to call my name, to stop me, to finally ask what was wrong. No one did. I stepped outside, the cool air hitting my face, and closed the door behind me without a sound. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, illuminating the empty driveway. I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan or a speech prepared. All I knew was that staying meant slowly disappearing. And leaving, terrifying as it was, felt like the first honest thing I'd ever done. As I walked down the street with my backpack digging into my shoulders, one thought repeated itself over and over, steady as a heartbeat. If I stayed, I would lose myself. If I left, I might finally find out who I was. The first night after I left, I didn't sleep. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the corner of a women's shelter downtown, my backpack hooked around my ankle like it might disappear if I let go. The room smelled faintly of detergent and stale coffee, and the lights buzzed softly overhead. Around me, other women rested on thin mattresses, some curled inward, some staring at the ceiling the way I had done for years. No one asked me questions I wasn't ready to answer. A woman at the front desk handed me a blanket and said, "You're safe here," like it was a fact, not a promise. That simple sentence made my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how long it had been since anyone said something like that to me. The days that followed blurred together. I learned the shelter's routines quickly. When meals were served, when showers were free, when the common room went quiet enough to think. I found a part-time job at a small cafe a few blocks away. The pay wasn't great, but the manager didn't ask about my family, didn't look at me with pity, didn't tell me to be grateful for things that hurt. I slept lightly, always half awake, like my body hadn't yet accepted that I didn't need to listen for footsteps in the hallway anymore. A week passed, then another. That was when my phone started buzzing. Dad. I watched it light up on the table beside my bed, vibrating itself silent. I didn't answer. Then it rang again the next day, and the day after that. Voicemails stacked up, unread messages blinking on my screen like unanswered questions. On the fourth call, my hand moved before my mind could stop it. "Hannah," my dad's voice cracked the second he said my name. "Thank God, please, please tell me where you are." I closed my eyes, pressing my free hand into my knee to steady myself. "Your room's still here," he rushed on like he was afraid I'd hang up. "We didn't touch anything. You can come home. We just want to talk." Home. The word landed wrong. Heavy. Hollow. I imagined my room exactly as I'd left it, quiet, unchanged, waiting for me, like proof that I was supposed to come back and pretend nothing had happened, that this was just a phase, a mistake. "I'm okay," I said, finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm safe." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Your mother's worried sick," he said. "Emily's been asking about you." I almost laughed. They weren't asking why I left, they were asking when I'd stop causing problems. "I need space," I said. "I'm not coming back right now. I would in their tear." The silence on the other end of the line stretched thin and tense. "This isn't how family works, Hannah," my dad said quietly, not angry, disappointed, like I'd failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I looked around the small room, the chipped paint, the shared shelves, the women who nodded at me in passing like they understood. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of where I was. "Neither was my birthday," I replied and ended the call. As I set the phone down, my hands were shaking, but beneath the fear, something unfamiliar was growing. Relief. For the first time in my life, I had stepped outside their rules and the world hadn't ended. For a few days after that call, the phone stayed quiet. No messages, no missed calls, no sudden apologies. A small, foolish part of me hoped that maybe they were thinking, really thinking about what I'd said, that maybe my absence had finally forced them to look at the empty space I'd been occupying for years without complaint. That hope didn't last long. I found out the truth in an email. It came from my college advisor, polite and confused, asking me to confirm my decision to withdraw for the upcoming semester. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I reread the message 3 times, my heart thudding harder with each line. According to the school's records, my parents had contacted the administration. They'd said I was taking time off, that I'd changed my plans, that I would not be attending. I stared at the screen, my hands cold, my mind racing. They hadn't asked me. They hadn't warned me. They'd decided. I called the advisor immediately, my voice shaking as I explained that no, this wasn't my choice, that I still intended to enroll. She apologized, clearly uncomfortable, and promised to flag the file, but the damage had already been done. Deadlines were missed, paperwork delayed, opportunities quietly slipped away while I slept on a borrowed mattress. That night, a letter arrives at the shelter. It wasn't handwritten, it wasn't emotional, it was legal. I sat at a small table under flickering lights, reading words that felt heavier than they should have been. I was being removed as a dependent. My parents would no longer support me financially, officially, or otherwise. I had 30 days to retrieve my belongings. After that, anything left behind would be disposed of at the homeowner's discretion. Tucked behind the formal pages was a single note written in my mother's familiar handwriting. This is what happens when you make selfish choices. My chest tightened, not with sadness, but with something sharper. This wasn't fear for my safety. This wasn't love disguised as discipline. This was punishment. They weren't trying to bring me home anymore. They were trying to teach me a lesson, to show me how small I was without them, how quickly they could pull the ground out from under my feet. I folded the papers carefully, my movements slow and deliberate. Around me, the shelter hummed with quiet conversations, footsteps, life continuing without noticing my private collapse. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Not anger, not panic, clarity. I finally understood what I was up against. Not parents who missed their daughter, but people who needed control more than connection. And if that was the game they wanted to play, then I knew one thing for certain. I would never give them that power again. After that letter, I didn't fall apart the way I thought I would. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I didn't show up at their door with the papers in my shaking hands, asking them how they could do this to me. I cried once, quietly, in the shelter bathroom, with the water running so no one would hear me. And then I stopped, because something had changed. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to them. I was responding for myself. The next morning, I met with a legal aid counselor the shelter connected me to. She spoke slowly, clearly, laying out my options like stepping stones instead of threats. She explained my rights, what my parents could and couldn't do, and how to protect myself moving forward. "You're not doing anything wrong," she said, meeting my eyes, "and you're not alone." Those words stayed with me. I picked up more shifts at the cafe, early mornings, late nights, sore feet and aching hands, but every dollar felt earned in a way nothing ever had before. I reopened my college applications on my own, rewriting forms without my parents' names attached to them. It was harder, slower, lonelier, but it was mine. A few weeks later, I moved into a small shared apartment with 2 other women from the shelter program. The walls were thin, the furniture mismatched, but the door locked from the inside, and no one controlled when I came or went. I slept better there than I ever had in my childhood home. School followed. Not immediately, not easily, but it came. A partial scholarship, a payment plan, a quiet email that started with the word congratulations and made my hands shake as I read it. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't need to. On my next birthday, I bought myself a cupcake from the bakery near the cafe. I sat alone at the small kitchen table in my new apartment, scraped together a candle, and wrote my name across the frosting in uneven letters. Hannah. No lectures, no comparisons, no one telling me to be grateful for pain. Just the quiet room, a steady breath, and the strange, powerful realization that I was building a life they could no longer reach, break by break, choice by choice. For the first time, my future didn't feel like something I had to ask permission for. It felt like something I was allowed to claim. I didn't announce my success. I didn't post it online. I didn't send a message marked, "Read at your convenience." But news has a way of traveling through the cracks you leave behind. It started with an email from the community college asking if I'd be willing to speak at a small event for first-generation students. Nothing fancy, no cameras, just a room full of people who had been told directly or indirectly that their futures were negotiable. I almost said no. Old instincts die hard. But then I remembered the girl who packed a hoodie and $60 and walked into the night because staying hurt more than leaving. I remembered the letter, the paperwork, the quiet cruelty dressed up as consequences. So I said yes. I talked about starting over with nothing but stubborn hope. I talked about learning the difference between support and control. I talked about how walking away doesn't make you ungrateful, it makes you honest. I didn't mention my parents by name. I didn't have to. A week later, my phone rang while I was shelving books at my campus job. Dad. I let it ring. Then again. On the third call, something in his persistence felt different, less certain, less entitled. I stepped outside and answered. "Hannah," he said, and this time his voice wasn't tight with authority. It was thin. "We heard you're doing well." I leaned against the brick wall, feeling the late afternoon sun on my face. "I am." There was a pause, then quietly, "You didn't have to do all of this alone." I almost laughed. All of this? The silence? The survival? "I didn't choose to be alone," I said. "I chose to stop being hurt." Another pause, longer this time. "Your mother's been asking about you," he added. "Emily, too." Of course she had. Emily always asked once things were already broken, once there was nothing left to fix without accountability. "We didn't think you'd actually stay gone," he admitted. "We thought you just needed time." Time? The word people use when they don't want to say control failed? "I stayed," I said evenly, "because leaving was the first time I felt safe." He didn't argue, he didn't lecture. For the first time in my life, he didn't try to explain me away. "I see that now," he said, and I believed him, but too late is still too late. "I'm not angry," I told him. "I'm just done pretending things didn't cost me anything." When the call ended, I stood there for a long moment, my hands steady, my chest calm. They finally felt the absence I'd lived with my entire life. And the strangest part, I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free because their realization didn't change my path. It just confirmed I'd chosen the right one. My life didn't transform overnight. There was no dramatic moment where everything suddenly felt perfect. What changed was quieter than that. I began waking up without the familiar knot in my stomach, the one that used to tighten the moment I heard footsteps in the hallway or voices downstairs. I started making decisions without rehearsing explanations in my head. I learned how it felt to exist in a space where no one was keeping score, where love didn't come with conditions or comparisons. My apartment is small, but it's mine. The furniture doesn't match, the walls are still mostly bare, and the radiator makes strange noises in the winter. But every inch of it belongs to a version of me that survived something real. I leave my keys on the counter without fear. I close the door at night knowing no one will open it to lecture me about who I should be. I still hear from my parents sometimes. The messages are careful now, measured. They ask how I'm doing. They mention Emily, her job, her plans, her achievements, as if those details might still tether me to the family I left behind. Occasionally, they talk about the past, but never directly, never with accountability, just soft language, just enough distance to avoid responsibility. I've learned not to chase closure. Through counseling, legal guidance, and time, I understood something important. I didn't owe them reconciliation to justify my healing. The law protected my independence, boundaries protected my peace, and distance gave me the clarity they never allowed me to have inside that house. Emily still wears her ring. My parents still believe they did the best they could. And maybe in their own way they did, but their version of best came at the cost of my voice, my safety, and my sense of worth. I don't need them to admit that for it to be true. I don't need an apology that would arrive too late and ask too much of me. What I needed, what I fought for, was a life where I could breathe. Now I mentor young women who remind me of myself, girls who learned too early how to stay quiet, who were praised for being easy and punished for needing anything at all. When they ask me how I did it, how I walked away, I don't give them a speech. I tell them the truth, that leaving isn't weakness, that choosing yourself doesn't make you cruel, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting to be seen by people who refuse to look. I used to believe I was the problem in my family, the difficult daughter, the ungrateful one, the disappointment. Now I know better.